Hello, hello. Welcome back to another episode of the Black on Black Education Podcast. I mean, do I have to say, as always, the guest is going to introduce themselves and let you know who they are, what they do, and why they do it.
All right. My name is Dawnavyn James. I am a kindergarten teacher. And the reason that I do is because kindergarten is the best grade to teach. I don't know any other thing to do.
My teach in high school would beg to differ, but to each their own. To each their own. And why is it that you chose teaching?
I just always wanted to be a teacher, and I've always loved school. I also noticed that there weren't a lot of teachers that looked like me, and I thought it'd just be really cool for kids to see a teacher that talks like them, walks like them, dresses like them, is proud to be them like them. So I really like that.
Overall in your teaching career, you've taught kindergarten, which clearly is your favorite. But you also did like multi-age settings, like we talked about that before. I'm always super curious about that. Like it seems like a kind of innovative model, and better to me than just 1, 2, 3. Could you share a little bit about that experience for us?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it because we can get to the point where education, like now in kindergarten, like my kids are just in kindergarten. Like I can't just send them off to first grade to do first grade math if they're ready to do first grade math. So in a multi-age classroom, it was just really cool to know, like, I could assess a kid and be like, you know what, I'm gonna move you to the next group. And that group is still in the same space. They're still with the same peers, but they're able to be challenged in that same space, which I really enjoyed. And then we did a lot of just multi-age, like inquiry and science and social studies. So they got to work with the older students, and the older students got to interact with the younger students. So I think it's a really cool model that I wish public schools will also kind of bring into the public school system.
Absolutely. I'm thinking about what were some of the outcomes that you saw when students had the opportunity to work with a student who had mastered something that they hadn't, or who was struggling with something that they understood? What did that dynamic look like in the classroom?
I think one thing I did notice is the decrease in behavior. I feel like sometimes when kids are bored, like they're not trying to hear what you got to say. I don't need to do that. Like, I'm bored. I know this already. And so that kind of like decreased all that. Like, okay, you're done with this. Let's move on to the next thing. And it was just a really accepting environment too. And it let kids know that I may not be as good of a reader. I may just, be here, but in math, like I'm bomb. So I get to work with the fourth graders in math, so it really kind of boosts their confidence too in that sense, which I really liked.
What was the block of age, like from where to where?
So it was kindergarten through 5th.
Wow. Okay. So that's a big block. I always think like kindergarten to 3rd, but kindergarten to 5th. What about the challenges around, 5th grader is they know more. I wouldn't say like bullying or anything like that, but just, they have had more time to develop. So can you speak to, the challenge of having all of the students kind of blend together?
Yeah, a lot, and the really cool thing too was there are a lot of siblings, so there wasn't just as much. But something I will note too is that in our program there were more like kindergarten first graders. There weren't as many 4th and 5th grade. There was one year we didn't even have 5th graders because parents wanted, because we didn't have a middle school option, so parents wanted their kids to kind of get into that public school environment, so they would take them out about 4th and 5th grade. And sometimes we wouldn't even, have that. But it was a small class too. There was no more than 35 kids. And then there was like 3 teachers. So it was just a lot of small kind of groups. So we could kind of monitor a lot of things.
I mean, it's just so cool, like to think about it in reality. I think that I've had the opportunity to think about it in theory and like what could it look like and what should it look like, but it's definitely really engaging to think about what it looks like in practice, because you all had the opportunity to actually do it. And something I'm super passionate about is thinking about how we do that in secondary school, and how
Yeah.
powerful that can be just from development standpoint. So I'm so excited to see education begin to start to tilt that way, with the increase in ideas about project-based learning, the increase in understanding that interdisciplinary studies make sense to implement. And so I'm really curious to think about how you started in that sort of setting, and what it was like and what it felt like to transition to kind of going back to that, nope, this is how we stay. Talk about the dichotomy between that and how it felt to switch.
Yeah, one thing I will say, I liked having my own space. I was sharing like this space with other teachers, and this our school is a private school, so it was on a college campus, so there's people in and out, there's people observing, and so it was just nice to kind of be like, you know what, this is mine, this is my space. And teachers have different teaching styles, and so the kids are getting different styles. I have to collaborate with people with different styles. So I'm like, okay, now it's just Miss James, what Miss James want to do, how Miss James want to teach, what Miss James want to read, which has been really, really awesome. And it's nice too that in my school, they are supportive of kids who may need a little bit more of a challenge. So I, do have room to do that, and kind of support them in that as well.
Dope. And when we talked in January, we did talk a lot about like project and inquiry-based learning. So obviously you did that with the kindergarten through fifth graders. I'm curious how that's working now while you're focused just on kindergarten students. Like what kind of projects, or give us like some questions. And the last thing I'll add to that is like those who don't know, like Dawnavyn is known kind of as like the freshest person on Instagram, teaching Instagram. Like she always with the drip, always with the dances, all of that stuff. So does any of that get added into, kind of projects that stimulates kids' minds and get them going?
Yeah, so with our social studies and science projects, even though, of course, the curriculum's kind of given to me and what we're going to do with kindergarten, like when we talk about living and non-living things, like it's what is a living thing? What's a non-living thing? And then like giving them space to like research that and write that down and explore. So we do a lot of that. I do as much inquiry as I can, even in math with kids. Like with kindergarten, like play, they don't know they're doing math, but we're playing through math, like doing real world math, asking real questions. And so I like to create a space in my classroom where my kids can question and kind of do their own research. They may ask me something, I'm like, I don't know. And so we can, look it up. I'm like, this is what I would do if you weren't here. And so providing that. But a lot of the dancing and the music, we do a lot of learning through that. Like we make up so many songs. Like we have a class pledge that we sing every morning. If we're studying a concept that might be a little bit difficult, I'm like, okay, let's pick a beat. So we'll pick a Drake beat. And they're like, I know that beat. And I'm like, well, it should be easy to figure out how to make the song because you already know the beat. So just bringing a lot of that in there too. And just making connections with our style. Like my kids come in with haircuts and I'm coming with my haircut, or they wear certain shoes. I'm like, okay, I like them shoes, and they're like, I'm gonna ask my mom where I got them. I'm like, okay. And so it's a really cool way to, to build relationships too. Like Miss James dresses like me, or she's wearing that, or her, she goes to the barbershop too. And I'm like, yeah. So it's just really cool.
Facts. And if you want to, drop any bars, for us on the podcast, we're always accepting of that. A couple of weeks ago, we had the dancing teacher on. It's okay. It's okay. You know what? I still could go to Instagram and see, but if you got bars for us, we're here for it.
I don't even remember it now. I'm thinking of it.
And I mean, you saying that makes me think about being in the classroom with my students. And I remember the first day of school, I didn't know what to wear. I didn't know how I wanted to show up. I'm like, I want my kids to think I'm corny, but I'm cool. I want my kids to think, I want them to see who I am. I want them to think it's weird that like I like to listen to Whoop-Dee, but I'm also about to watch a Disney movie. Like I'm a very multifaceted person, and I want them to see that. But how do I show up with like that on day one? I didn't, but eventually I figured it out. And so it was so cool when we're at the end of the year party and they're playing Whoop-Dee and they're like, Miss, it's your song. I'm like, yeah.
Turn up. I love it.
And you're turning up with your kids, and like, then the day after that, when they're like, wait, hold on, but I still need to finish like X, Y, and Z because graduation's next week.
Yeah.
They're going to come to me before they come to the person who's stuffy and you know what I mean? And so I so appreciate that, especially at such a young age, right? Because I'm thinking about the only thing I remember from kindergarten is them white powdered donuts we used to get. That's the only thing I remember about kindergarten. And I know for a fact that your students are going to remember a teacher who came in with long nails and a haircut and fresh sneakers.
Yes.
They're going to remember that. And they're going to know that it has something to do with how they felt like they could show up in the world. So I just want to give you all the kudos for that. And so, I mean, it just it does bring into like early childhood education, not my wheelhouse.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not coming down there. Talk about like the importance of it in school, at home.
Mm-hmm.
Like what are you noticing, having been an educator for kindergarten? Kids are just now getting introduced to education and to the system in that way. Please just kind of walk us through a little bit of the importance of it and the impact you've been able to make, and how you'd like to scale that impact, because we know it's necessary.
Yeah, I think what's important, well, to me personally, is I want my kindergartners to see the importance of education and to see that, you know, that's one thing nobody can ever take away from you. Like, they cannot take away your knowledge. Like, whatever you know, like, you'll always know that. Nobody can take that away. And so I just think it's important with those young, like, you have to start in, like, you have to go in like, oh, we don't talk to people like that. And if you do, this is what's going to happen. You see what happened. That's how people are going to respond to you, you know? Even with differences in the class where we talk about that, like, is that okay to make fun of them for, like, you really have to be like, I'm very upfront, like, hold on, let's have a meeting, because that ain't it. Like, let's talk about this. And I just rather them get it then than to grow up and be like, dang, I never knew that, or, you know, nobody ever taught me that. So with early childhood, like, you just have to be really honest with them, because they're going to ask you, or they're going to do things, and if you don't correct it or support it or nurture it, then, you know, where is it going to go? And so I have noticed that over these last few years was like kind of like the COVID, these interactions with each other. We've been working really hard on that. They don't know how to, they're struggling with interacting with people. Like, you can't talk to people like that. Like or they're just like all in people's space, like back up, like there's personal space. So trying to teach them that, how to interact with each other, how to recognize, you know, people's space, and just show them like how independent and smart they can be, you know, just fostering that young. So when they grow up, nobody's, you know, telling them, well, you can't do that. Actually, Miss James said that I could. Like, in my classroom, we are kings and queens. And how do kings and queens act? That's what it is. And my kids walk around the school like I tell them, y'all the best thing walking in here. Let's show them what to do. 5th grade, 4th, I don't care about that. We are kings and queens. So just instilling that into them young, so that can't nobody tell them nothing, because they know who they are.
Right. I definitely love that. And you brought up something key that obviously we're going to be talking about for a long time. And that's COVID. And you know, we're just going through this period of challenge for so many people. And, you know, whenever challenges come, opportunities come as well. So I want you to kind of give us your perspective on, one, what was that experience like? Like, were you teaching virtually? Were you actually in the physical classroom during COVID? And then what have we learned that we can take as we go and we say, this is what the new normal is going to be in education? Like, so that we're not just going back to the way that things were.
Yeah, so we started off, I signed up to be an in-person teacher, but we started off on Zoom. And so we did that from like August to, I believe, November-ish. And then my kids came in the classroom, and then we went back on Zoom. And then in January, when they came kind of like after that winter break, then we were all back in seat. So it was very interesting. It was a struggle. Because at one point we were coming to school on Monday, Tuesday, but not on Wednesday, and then on Thursday, Friday, and doing that with kindergartners who have been online. It was just a lot. It was confusing. It was just a lot of them, like a lot of transitioning for them. But what I will say is that, you know, they knew how to do it. I mean, they could figure it out. Like, today on no school day. Nope. Today we're coming to school this day. We're doing that. But I think one of the things, and I've been talking to so many people about it, that I appreciate, and I think families did too, was with family teacher conferences, we did those via Zoom. And I feel like that's the first time in a while that I had most of my family show up, because it was convenient. There's so many families that, you know, work more than one job, have more than one child, that can't just pop in at 6:30 to come talk to you about their child, but to hop on Zoom. Everyone, you know, most people have access to a phone. So like chatting with people like that, I hope that's something that never changes. Like, I hope we never go back to in-person family teacher conferences, unless, parents can. But if there's an opportunity where a family's like, I can't make it in, I'm like, hey, you can call me on Zoom, you can call me on the phone. I just feel it was just really, really cool to talk to families in that way and have families just show up because it was convenient for them. So I hope that in education, we're just more accommodating to parents. I feel like we had to be that this year. Like, you had to be accommodating. Like, if a kid couldn't get on Zoom or there's some stuff going on in the background, you had to be okay with that because these kids are at home. And so you just really have to be, I just hope people are accommodating to families more and understand that, my family's probably like your family. And we got stuff going on, just like, our students. So.
Yes, I love that. And it makes me kind of just want to ask a little bit about, like, what do you think your kids learned and what do you think your families learned for the better over this time? So of course, we never are using COVID as like, this was a great time,
right.
But I do think that we learned a lot that we need to take back into when we go back into the building. And so what do you think the kids learned about resilience and about how school works and education and communication?
Mm-hmm.
And same thing for the parents. I found that I think parents had a connection to the school and what happened in the school way more than they ever did before. It was such a disjointed, I had no idea. And I think a lot of parents left from this whole, the kid comes home and, hey, why did you get in trouble with so-and-so? And just choose the teacher. Where now you hear parents who are like, who is that talking to my child? Like, they ain't got no sense. Yeah. So I just like talk a little bit about like those experiences and interactions that you've had, because I definitely saw them.
Yeah, for sure. For parents, I remember like when we came back in seat, there were a lot of parents that were like, I feel like I don't know what's going on because I'm hearing what y'all doing every day. Like, so they kind of felt left out. And I'm like, oh my God. But they were just so used to kind of being in the classroom. I mean, I always, sent out like newsletters each week, but I feel like this year I was like more communication because I feel like parents were like sad, like, dang, like, I don't know what you teaching. I don't know what they learning because you're not in my home anymore. And I think, what you were saying too, like you're saying some parents like, who's talking to my child like that? I think some other parents are like, who is my child talking to like that? Because there were some kids in my class, I was like, and the parents was turning that mic off. Like, hold on, let me mute you. Let me turn this camera off real quick, get you together and send you back. So I do think some parents kind of got to see, who their kid is when they're at school. And then for my kid, I mean, I just feel like they learned so much about technology. They were teaching me things on Zoom that I did not know that you could do. Like, oh no, Miss James, you can do that. And they knew how to hop in and hop out. But I think they just learned just a different way to learn too. You can learn online, you can learn in seat, but I think a lot, like with kindergarten, it was just easier for me to have them with me because there's just some things you can't teach kindergartners on a computer screen. Like, you just need to physically be there with them.
Yeah, I just hope that we start to use a mix, man. I hope that there are times where if you're talking about having K through 5 in a all in a, let's say not a classroom, but just, in a learning environment together. So you take the classroom out of it, maybe they're on Zoom sometime doing a project, answering a question together, and coming up with things that they wouldn't otherwise come up with if the sage on the stage is just telling them, kind of what to learn throughout the whole process. So it's something that I've recently, got on the school board in my local district. Okay. We're in talking to parents and talking to the community, you have people who are like, oh my God, Zoom, loved it. Mm-hmm. And people who are like, Zoom, hated it. And so, so you say, hey, you got options. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. If everybody wants to be in the classroom every single day, if somebody wants to have class Fridays from home, let's figure out a way to make that work for students. Because some students, that could be the difference between saying, you know what? This school thing's not so bad versus, I really just don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah, I totally agree.
So for you, we've talked a little bit about being the only teacher of color in your school, and I'm just I'm curious, like what's the dynamic of your school, like kind of social dynamic and race kind of a breakdown, and then like does it get lonely being kind of the only teacher of color, and do you find people like they're coming to you for everything that relates to like Black people? Share how that's been for you, what your experience has been there.
Yeah, so in the first school that I taught at, like I was just the only person of color, no students, no teachers, and so it was just always like, well, Miss James will know. Like, no, I don't know all the experiences of all Black people. Like, I just don't. And so now in my classroom, I mean, there's a really cool dynamic of just different colors and cultures in there. And so it's just nice to kind of have that as well. And there are, I believe, 3 educators of color in my school now. And so it's in my first school, it did get lonely because I'm like, I don't have nobody to relate to me. Black people, we be having that look like, girl, I didn't have nobody look at like that in the meetings, like, what's going on? And so it is just nice to be around other people that look like you, whether it's kids or, or adults. I feel like, I don't know, there's a mix. Like some people will come to me and ask me things about certain things. And then other times, I'm just kind of in my room doing my thing. I got stuff out in the hallway. People are like, oh, what's that? And I'll talk to them about it. But it's even though they're not a lot of people that look like me, it is a very supportive environment. People do want to know, like, okay, like, what is it that you're doing? How are you doing that with these kids or in this classroom or in this time, or where do you find time to do that? And I'm like, you really want to know? But it is nice to kind of see some people that do look like you, especially like little people who look like you. It's a lot better.
Yeah. I mean, one, because that you're making the impact in their life.
Yeah.
And then also to think, going back to the conversation about people who look like you and being in schools and having that person to look to, we also do have to discuss the fact that you said like this you only have 3 people of color, but it's a supportive environment, because there's some people who work in all Black spaces or all minority spaces or all people of color spaces that don't feel supported, that feel overwhelmed, that feel underappreciated, and all these other things. So I think it's important to bring in that part, because we often make a very sharp delineation of, okay, you don't work with any people of color, so that means it has to be a bad situation. Now, is it important for the kids in the school to have a diverse teaching staff? Absolutely. But it's also important for them to have a staff that understands the needs of those people. And so talk a little bit about your experience as an educator and how it inspired Black History Club, and like just give people a rundown of what that is. And just, I mean, it's the reason we found you, and it's just so cool to think about, not only am I teaching and learning in my classroom, but I'm teaching and learning outside of to a wider community. Talk a little bit about how that was created.
Yeah, so I just always feel like the Black History Club was in my classroom. Like that's what I mean. Black history is important, just like any other history in my classroom. Like we talk about everybody, but it was just a space where I felt like I could be Black, like in my classroom. I can be as Black as I want to be, and my kids are going to accept that. And I could teach Black, they could learn Black, I could show Blackness, like Blackness is in here. And so I just always feel like it was like this little exclusive club, like, oh, yep. And so I had some families ask if I did like Black history tutoring. I was like, no, I don't do that. But I've been like, pondering this idea about creating this Black History Club. So last year I had about 15 kids who we met on Zoom every week for an hour. And all we did was talk about Black history. And they get, so you have to pay for Black History Club, and they get a t-shirt, they get a book about a Black historical figure. I have like stickers, and it's a multi-age group. So it's pre-K-ish. I had 2 4-year-olds on there last year who were phenomenal, all the way up to 6th grade. And we talked about Black history. Each month was a theme. So we talked about the Black Panther Party. We talked about the Tulsa Race Massacre. We talked about Black music, Black art. We did something different every month. And they had assignments sometimes, but it's just really cool. Like they really created a community and a safe place for them to question, well, why did that happen? And why are we not doing that now? Like, why are we not doing what the Black Panthers are doing now? And I'm like, I don't know. So it was just, a place for them to kind of feel like, what, I can talk about that here. And it's not just Black kids in Black History Club. There's all kinds of kids there. And it was just a really cool place for them to collaborate. The older ones were supporting the younger ones. The younger ones feel like they could speak up too and share information. And so it was just really cool. For their last, project, they actually have art on display at a local museum that they created for the Tulsa Race Massacre. And then we had a reception, we had food, and so a few of the young historians came. But it's just really cool to have kids from all over the country just pop in Zoom for an hour every week and just chat and talk about Blackness, the Blackness that they're not hearing and talking about at school. So it's really cool.
So you bring up a great point in that they're not talking about in school. And so I'm curious, have you made an attempt to bring, Black History Club to your school? And the second part of that question is it is important, obviously, not just for Black kids to learn Black history. Yes. Talk about why it's important for everybody to learn Black history.
Absolutely. Yes, that's my goal, to bring make Black History Club a physical, right after school, hey, let's meet for Black History Club. So that is definitely something I've been working on. But I worked in a classroom with all white students, and we talk Black history, and it's important because it's just history. They need to know who invented, it's not a white person that invented that, or a Black person invented that, or a Hispanic person invented that, or a Native American invented that. It's just important history for them to know. And in society, Black people, they don't paint us to be the best people. And so I think it's important, especially for kids who may not be Black, to just see how excellent we are and how we're everywhere. Everything stems from us. We're dope. We just are. And not to say that nobody else is, but come on. It's just really important for them to kind of see that and they relate to it. Even though, they're not Black, I know we learn, because I want my kids to see the full picture of people. Yes, this person did this, but when we talk about Martin Luther King Jr., okay, yes, he marched and did this, but he was also a dad. He was also a husband. Coretta Scott King, let's talk about her. Let's talk about everything that was happening at that time. So to really humanize these people for students is just really cool. And no matter what color they are, they really relate to these people and see what they were trying to do, and they can have these discussions in the classroom.
And I think in this moment, to hear what you just said, it is so important, right? And I say that because we're in a space where critical race theory is something that is being banned across the country. And what you just talked about is critical race theory in education. A part of critical race theory in education is telling counter stories.
Right.
That is a tenet of critical race theory. And so if we were able to better have a conversation about that, which I feel like obviously you are very good at, we were just able to better communicate the reasons why it is important to discuss the differences between us. But the reason that the differences should not be a reason to disconnect us, but to connect us, because there are so many commonalities in different cultures. And so, what do you say to the people that think that what you're doing is a problem because your kids are too young? They're not ready for that. It's too much for them to know all of that right now. They don't need it. Talk to that person who's kind of stuck in this mindset that you need to get to a certain age to be able to discuss race, class, and all the other things that you speak with your students about.
Yeah, I would just tell you that that's not true. And it's all in how you present it, how you present this information, how you teach it to them, and allowing them to process it. There's just a way to talk to kids about things. And so my way is always picture books. There's so many fabulous picture books out there that teach all kinds of history. But these kids are living this life. The current events that I may bring up in the classroom, a lot of my kids have already talked about at home or saw on TV, or they're bringing it in. Did you see what happened on the news? Or they're talking to each other about it. So if I don't foster that in my classroom, then where is that being fostered? Who's showing them the facts? Or, who's supporting that? Oh, yep, I did see that happened. like, how are you feeling about it? So creating this space for them to learn that. But I mean, they're not too young. I mean, if you could talk to my kids, they know a lot. And a lot of the things that I don't know if they retain, but they definitely do. They remember all kinds of things because they'll say things like, well, a long time ago, we wouldn't all be together. And I'm like, well, why is that? They're like, what's that word? Segregation? I'm like, yeah, segregation. So they know these terms. They know these things. They know the importance of Black people and Hispanic people. And, they just know all of that. They bring it in there. I know we've had conversations about men wearing dresses, and my kids are like, you know what, men can wear dresses. Didn't Miss James read a book about that? And they're like, well, you're right. I mean, they're having these like little conversations, and I just facilitate and I support that because they're people. At the end of the day, kids are people, and they're growing up in this world, and they're engaging with certain people inside and outside of school. And if I'm not going to have these conversations with them in the classroom, I don't know who is. And this is a safe place for them to be. But they get it and they understand and they see it. And I have kids who have brown skin, so they're feeling it too. So, it's there and they get it.
And the thing is, kids tend to have a sense, an innate sense of fairness. Like, they haven't been jaded by the world, just yet, especially at that age. They tend to feel like, wait, they did what? To who? How? Like, oh my goodness. So, particularly if you're the first person, bringing this to them, you don't have to, indoctrinate. You just put it in front of them, like, this is what happened. And they know that those things are wrong. And of course, the earlier, the better to get that in that type of empathy in their, in their hearts and in their minds, and having them start to think about how they want to show up in the world. They know, I don't ever want to do anything, like that. I'm going to be nice to you. I'm going to be nice to you. I'm going to be nice to you. Oh, you want to dress different? You know what? Cool. Come on over here. Give me a hug. Like, kids are they generally just have that. So, it's the adults that need not to stamp these things out or pull these things out of them. Just, let them foster those feelings. So,
absolutely.
Kudos to you for continuing to to make it happen for these kids.
Yeah, and I think so something that you said in the pre-call that I wanted to make sure was named and quoted. You said we put on children that they're not smart, empathetic, or wise enough to have this conversation, and 9 times out of 10 that we're wrong. And I think, and then that one time where we're right, it's because it was said wrong. It wasn't said, it wasn't explained correctly. They needed more context. They needed more information. The reality is that with my 4-year-old cousin, I can have a conversation about segregation with her as someone who looks very, very phenotypically different from me. And she walks out and is friends with her white friends and is friends with her Black friends and wants to be a doctor to help all people and do all things. And then when you give them this information, you create the next doctors and lawyers that aren't that aren't socialized to believe that the system has to stay the way it is. So I think that what you're doing is so powerful and so impactful. And I think I want you to kind of leave people with how do they, we're not stealing nobody's idea, but how do they create their own Black History Club? How do they get their kids in yours? What are the ways that they get to do this with their children, particularly for those folks who it's not happening at school? And so for the teachers, the educators, the parents, the families who want their kids to learn and understand these things, but don't know where to start, talk a little bit about that for them.
I just think you have to start with what is it that you want to do? What are you interested in? A lot of what I share and learn with my young historians in the Black History Club is things that I'm interested in. I have so many ideas for this next year because I never want to teach the same thing over and over again. But just think of some things that we're not learning about. We don't talk about Black cowboys. There were Black cowboys. Because we don't see them on TV either. So just thinking about things that are interesting to you or that your kids may bring up in our, inquiring about, and bring that in and bring in lots of books and bring in pictures of Black people in color. Now, I know sometimes that's hard to find, older pictures, but pictures of Malcolm X in color look so cool to my kids. They're like, Miss James, where did you find that picture of Malcolm X? Do you know him? No, I don't know him, but just presenting it, because it makes history not seem so far away to them, like when they can see these people like live in color. So just bringing in artifacts and just allowing them to process it and talk about it and question. You may not have every answer. I know sometimes that can kind of hinder us. We're like, well, I don't know what to say. What if they ask me this? You're not going to have all the answers. I don't have all the answers either, but you have to be willing to do the research and find the answers and be honest. Like, well, I don't know. Well, let's find out. And so that's a really cool way to kind of to build a Black History Club and get a group of people who are interested and will support you, and y'all can make it, you know, real cool. Like, I want mine in person, so I'm waiting for that. But yeah, you know, find some people that support you and bring that stuff together and just let your kids, you know, really immerse themselves in the history and learn about these people.
Dope. So we're coming to that point in the podcast where we kind of flip things around a little bit and we give you the opportunity to become the interviewer. So if you have you know, question for Eva or myself or both of us, you know, now's the time.
No, I just want to ask y'all, like, where do y'all see yourselves like in a year or so? Because I just love what y'all do, like the post that y'all post. I'm like, I'm gonna screenshot that, I'm gonna share that, I'm gonna do that. I mean, it's just really cool. So like, where do y'all see yourselves by like next year? Where is Black education gonna be doing?
So I guess if I start, it'd be like we would have created like 1,000 schools, and like so I would tend to add way too many things to. I overestimate what can get done in a year, and then underestimate what can get done in 5. So I'm trying to think more about the 5, but just in the course of the next year, we're 501(c) pending now, and we have a number of different things that we're focused in on, and we go back and forth with each other over which direction we should take things. Right now, we're wrestling with focus groups and what that might look like to go through focus groups with students, focus groups with teachers, focus groups with administrators, focus groups with school boards, as well as the kind of federal and state officials who are a part of education, and then looking at where are the areas of intersection? Wow, everybody agrees on this over here, but everybody disagrees over this over here. Try to navigate the overall conversation, because this thing is, education is a behemoth. And if we don't have the rest of the revolution that, my man Principal Ra talks about, we need all hands on deck. So we kind of want to, I want to formalize, how we ask those questions and how we explain that to the overall community.
And I want to do that too. On the 501(c)(3) side, I definitely want to be able to use that research, but I mean, it's for a purpose. I never, ever want to stop working with kids. I don't ever want to get into a job where I don't get to be young, because I'm around young people and I'm around people who think differently than I do and engage with the world differently than I do. So I always want to work with kids. Now, does that mean I want to work for the system? No, ma'am. So I think that I want whatever we do in the next year to set us up to be able to create education spaces where kids feel seen, heard, loved, cared for. And then on the business side, we want to keep holding conferences. We want to keep holding conversations. We want to keep supporting educators that are still working in the classroom, because the reality is that work can't stop. And so over the course of the next year, we have some really cool like merch that's going to be coming out to support educators in their classroom, discussion prompt card decks, affirmation card decks for them to like it. Sometimes it's just the fact that you're an educator, you got 1,000,001 things to do a day, and the last thing you want to do is create this and this for your class. So we want to do the work for you so that the kids still get what they need. So over the course of the next year, it's just going to be building, it's going to be engaging, it's going to be creating community. And the biggest thing we're excited about is that we're starting it's not even 2 weeks, next week, the Black and Black Education Teacher Action Board, which is a collaborative space. And over the course of the next 10 months of the rest of the school year, we're going to come together once a month for 2 hours to discuss the work, to develop each other professionally, and to do the things that help us go into the classroom being anti-racist and culturally responsive. So I am extraordinarily excited about starting that. And we're just going to keep doing what we're doing, figuring out as we go, building the blocks. And that's it.
Yeah, well, I love what y'all do. So thank you.
Well,
Thank you.
as well. Any last things you want to leave folks with? How to get in touch with you? What ways that they might be able to support your efforts and everything you're doing?
Yeah, so you can follow me on Instagram at Queendom Teaching. And I think from there, maybe not. There's also an Instagram page for the Teaching Black History Club as well. You can just kind of see what it is that we do there. And if you want to sign somebody up, or if you want to message me about sponsoring a kid for the Black History Club, please let me know. And I just want to leave y'all with, if you leave Black history out of your curriculum, you're doing it on purpose. So, that's just that. But teach these babies. They can learn it. They can do it. I promise. Again.
Mic drop moment.
Boom. There's nothing else to be said. Have a good one, y'all.